Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us during the Lytham Partner Summer 2022 Investor Conference. My name is Robert Briza, Vice President of Lytham Partners. During this presentation, we welcome in Richard Baker, CEO of TAAL Distributed Information Technology. Today, I've asked the company to run through a brief slide presentation, and then we'll engage in a fireside chat, like a Q&A session. Before we begin, for those not familiar with Lytham Partners, it's one of the country's leading investor relations firms dedicated to corporate access. Before we begin, on one final item, I want to remind everyone that the company is available for one-on-one meetings later this week. If you've not already signed up, please send me an email at Briza, B-R-E-Z-A, at lythampartners.com or visit www.lythampartners.com. Click on the /virtual and click on the one-on-one meeting request button. With that said, let me turn the presentation over to Richard Baker, CEO of TAAL Distributed Information Technology. Please go ahead.
Good day, Robert. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and a pleasure to be with you again for this conference. And wow, we're in the summer already. The year seems to be motoring by. Well, hello, everybody. And I will take you through just a few updates on TAAL, and then looking forward to the fireside chat just on a few points. So firstly, I guess for those of you that are unfamiliar with TAAL, we're a hybrid organization in the fact that we are a blockchain mining company, but we are also a blockchain infrastructure company, meaning we blend software services on top of those mining assets to bring transaction processing and ultimately data management services to customers. And I'll dive into a little bit of that because we've had some real progress in that area so far this year, and really excited about what that business is looking like later this year and into 2023. But we reported just in May on our Q1 financials, and that was closing out both 2021 full year financial audited accounts, as well as giving an update on Q1. So a stellar performance in 2021. We still had a strong performance in Q1. Obviously, Q2, as we sit here in the crypto industry, and particularly a company that focuses on SHA-256 blockchains, which means that we mine Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, Bitcoin Cash, and the Bitcoin BTC, so core. We can economically switch across those key coins, but as I will comment in a few minutes, we've seen price pressure, we've seen the market come off, and so this crypto winter has gone on for everybody much longer than expected, and it probably drives us and motivates us to really focus on where those non-subsidy revenues come from into the near future. And that comes from the transaction processing, from running a blockchain infrastructure on the mining assets. And so to that, maybe I'll give that a little bit of shape. So today, TAAL runs a very strong software portfolio, and over 40 customers are today enjoying interacting with these products. And so what do you use the blockchain for? Obviously, it was invented back in 2008 to be this decentralized, immutable database of trust, so I can write a record, a data record, to the underlying chain, and that record is distributed through the peer network and held so that it cannot be tampered with. And that gives enterprises of every shape and size security in that data record that they've written to the chain. So one of our core roles is ultimately providing the access points for how you actually write data into the chain. And that we do through something called TAAL Console. And so TAAL Console is a collection of application interfaces. It makes it easy for enterprise and startup customers to write their records into the chain. Our job when they write records to the chain is ultimately to run software that allows us to verify that transaction, make sure that there's no double spend, and then we queue it ready to process that transaction as an approved transaction or a verified transaction into the next block. And so you can follow the logic of, once I've written a transaction to the blockchain, the next thing you're really keen to do is ultimately read. Can I then follow up and see where my transaction record is? And we have a product called What's on Chain, which is today a world-class blockchain explorer tool. And this tool allows you to do some really great reporting and analysis on the blockchain that you've written your data transaction to. So we've seen huge traction on these two products over the last 6 months, and we're seeing an acceleration in the growth of transaction. And I'm sure Robert will quiz me on this a little bit later, but I think you can probably start to see from TAAL this year forward that transaction volume is a key performance indicator for the company. We are seeing more transactions in the first quarter of this year than we saw all of 2021. And it's a notable component of our growth strategy. Just to touch on, I guess, the next evolution, where do you ultimately then start to link in a customer's environment the generation of a transaction, and that is around how you tokenize assets. So whether I'm a capital markets firm and I'm beginning to digitize my futures and swaps business, or whether I'm a supply chain business and I'm digitizing physical assets in a supply chain inventory, or I'm a smart city and I'm digitizing Internet of Things, I use token protocols to ultimately digitize physical assets in the real world and write their data inventories into the blockchain. And we've seen, again, successful take-up in our token portfolio as well over the last 6 months with a product that we have called STAS. And you'll see a lot more from TAAL in the coming months on the token portfolio. So, I guess we can talk about this business now very much looking a bit like a software as a service company. We provide a portfolio of toolkits that ultimately allow somebody to create an account, come and start to process transactions, use token protocols, use data explorers, and this is a really enriched service experience. And it's akin really to what we've seen in the last 15 years from the cloud computing revolution. So as Google, Amazon, Snowflake, those kind of companies built out their compute and storage infrastructure, they built on that infrastructure software applications that made it easy to use that underlying utility. And again, I think this is a key word in the TAAL journey and the ecosystem we're part of, which is the Bitcoin Satoshi Vision journey, which is we are a highly scalable blockchain, and ultimately we are building a utility service for customers around the world to be able to use the blockchain for real value, helping them save money, but ultimately creating, smart contracts and chains of event that give them real, immutable, and secure control over their data. And I mentioned the chain, one again to just orientate everybody, but the forks that have happened on the Bitcoin SHA-256 protocol is depicted here in this picture. But whilst we separate, we should always mentally separate tokens from technology and protocols. And so often, certainly at TAAL, we talk about Bitcoin Satoshi Vision and the Bitcoin protocol. And the protocol is ultimately that helps us run the network and build software services. Whereas obviously frequently in investor markets, we'll talk about tokens, which is the coins, BTC, BSV, BCH. We care about both, but we care most about the journey for the protocol and how it is being adopted as a utility service, because indirectly that utility gives the token value into the long term. And perhaps this is foundational to a TAAL argument, which is we're a long-term believer in utility economics, not just store of value economics that we've seen historically be the argument around BTC. And so for those, again, that perhaps are not aware, when you are a blockchain mining company, day to day, you run your mining infrastructure, these ASIC machines, ultimately to derive subsidy rewards. That is your revenue stream. That's your yield income. We do that, but we increment to that transaction fees that come from every block that is formed and the volume of data transactions that we're able to put inside each block. Excuse me. And this is the big journey board really for BSV. We run 4 gigabit sized blocks today versus 1 megabit that runs on the BTC network. And so we are packing a huge volume of transactions inside every block, and we're monetizing that. And of course, this drives to the utility story of what we're doing as an infrastructure provider. And so beyond this, that economies of scale that really is derived from the way that we think about increasing block sizes over time. And so 4 gigabits is not the endpoint. We will see this chain ultimately expand to unscalable, unbounded sizes of blocks. And that tells you a little bit as well about the unit economics around the mining operation that is to come in the future. We will see a consolidation of mining companies, because ultimately there will only ever be a handful of very supersized nodes that are running this blockchain in the future. And when you're running those supersized blockchain nodes and processing very large block sizes and huge transaction volume, that's where you see real economies of scale. And in order to achieve that, you need low unit economics in the way that you run a transaction fee. And so today on the BSV chain with TAAL, our customers enjoy 1/1000 of a cent of a transaction fee every time they process with us. And you compare that to the Bitcoin network at $2, or the Ethereum gas fee, which hovers around $16. And you and I have to ask each other, when we're paying for a cup of coffee and that coffee is costing us $3.20, is it really viable to be paying $16 as the gas fee? And the answer is no. But that becomes even more important when we look at microtransactions into the future coming from Internet of Things devices. And so with that, I would also just link that utility story to what we all care about as well, which is our role in managing ESG. And TAAL pays a great deal of attention to its mining infrastructure and the data centers that we are running. And yes, we source clean energy and low power to ensure we're optimally running those data centers. But along that journey, we're making sure we're buying the best performing ASICs. But because of our very large block sizes, we are the most efficient blockchain network per kilowatt hour spent. And the charts I'm showing you on screen here is already showing that for over the last 16 months, the BSV network and the way TAAL runs its operations has been 98% more sustainable and compliant, and therefore efficient, than the BTC network. And I guess my last point in terms of what you can look forward to from TAAL in the second half of 2022 and into 2023 is a lot more stories around how we're onboarding clients in major markets. And this is that we're focused on healthcare, supply chain, financial services, and gaming. And there's a number of customers that we work with today in all of these sectors that are using our blockchain every day and firing in very high volume transactions to underpin their businesses. And it's as we're seeing the blockchain used as a utility data network that it gets really exciting about the digital transformation that these industries are making. And so this is what we're excited about for the second half of the year. And we're gearing up our software services team in terms of developers and product managers to make sure we can sustain and drive the growth coming from these industry sectors. Incremental to that, it's not just those 4 verticals. We're part of a much wider and richer ecosystem now. We have over 1,500 developers in the BSV ecosystem. Actually, I'm delighted to say in early June, there was a very major announcement from one of the BSV ecosystem companies called Script, where they launched a portability layer to allow all Ethereum Solidity developers to ultimately port their applications and services over to the BSV chain. So if you've built innovative products, now come and use the highly scalable footprint of the BSV chain and the low transaction fees, and don't pay those gas fees. And you will see a lot more about that kind of attracting very large pools of developers in the months ahead. And I guess to round out, we also continue to expand as per our original commitments on the mining footprint. We are amidst our build plan for our New Brunswick site in Canada, and that will come online in steps in 2023. And that's as we take the company from the 425 petahash of capacity at the beginning of the year in incremental steps all the way through to 2 exahash by the end of 2023. I'll pause there, Robert. I've covered a lot of ground on this update.
No, that's great. I really appreciate the update and everything. When we look at successful software companies, we've learned over time it's the developer community that really drives adoption, innovation, et cetera. How would you characterize the the developer market today, you mentioned the ability to port over from Ethereum, which historically I've seen that play out extremely well. The ability to move from one development environment to the next and be able to do that successfully and quickly, which I would expect will drive bigger adoption. How do you think about the developer world today, and with those added utilities to become more efficient and lower cost, which really is the ultimate goal?
Yeah, definitely. I think we talk about the developer community as the builders. We refer to them as the builders, and builders exist in all shapes and sizes. I think, Robert, really, I think they are the 16-year-old in the bedroom inventing a brand new game. They are the young entrepreneurs that are starting new businesses in every major city in the world, so the startups. And they certainly are the developers that are hired and run very large enterprise software businesses, and whether that's a bank or, a transport utility. And so we have to be mindful about where do those builders go to get their information. And there are common portals, like most of them will hang out in places like GitHub, because there's rich document resources, and there's tools and toolkits and sample codes that they can pick up. So we have to be available there. So I think that, I guess, firstly is your mindset around that builder persona and how you make yourself accessible to them. And that's probably the key point. And with that means you have to have great documentation. You have to have an agile mindset. You need to be releasing quite a lot of your capability as open source, so that actually you can be discovered and they can take your code and go and build and try something. And we are living in a world where it is trial and error. It's build a proof of concept. It's build a product market fit. And you're seeing that really now within the very large enterprises as well, which is teams are given permission to say, okay, show me how that's going to work. Build a proof of concept. Bring me a product market fit in 3 to 6 months. And we have to be in tune with those development cycles. And that's definitely what we're doing. So yes, we show up in Python communities and SQL communities, in GitHub, now in the Solidity Ethereum environment. And part of this is about being open and being available for those builders to find you.
Absolutely. Maybe as a follow-up, usually developers, want to go to the utility environment or the environment where it is very, very fast and very low cost. And as the developers are really moving in that world, you mentioned in your prepared remarks or discussion here that we talked towards bringing in the unbounded world of the 4 gig underpinning of the transaction fees, which I find extremely exciting for yourselves and investors, which as we get bigger and bigger blocks, we usually get bigger and bigger transaction fees, which means bigger and bigger revenue. Thus, if I'm a developer and I see that you're investing and continuing to make strong, significant guidance in terms of your capabilities for the underlying infrastructure, 4 gigs, et cetera, where do you think the market is really failing to recognize the ability of the original Satoshi vision relative to where we are today?
Oh, I love how you always give me the really big, tough questions. I think we've had Bitcoin available to the world for 13 years, since 2008. I think we're both old enough, Robert, to have seen various technology journeys, and I probably can't answer that question for you without saying there is always some kind of technology war or religion around what ultimately leads to mass adoption. And I think we have seen original Bitcoin protocol and white paper get really quite very distorted in its mission in the last 5 to 8 years. The original Bitcoin protocol never really talked about 16,000 cryptocurrencies. And So I really feel for investors at the moment who are trying to look at all of these tokens and figure out, yes, you can be a day trader and speculatively trade on some of those tokens, but really if you're looking for what's the next big thing in technology, the vast majority of those tokens are not the next big thing in technology. Technology rests on fundamentals. It requires standards, protocols, working groups, and certainly the Bitcoin protocol is that. So part of our challenge has been that the original vision got derailed for a period of time and has come back to the market over the last 18 months. So, I think I was delighted. I was in Dubai in early June for the Bitcoin Association, the BSV big conference. And we had, on that conference, we saw the announcement of IPv6, which is the networking standard associated to how IP networks work in the world. And we saw a joint presentation of how IPv6 will partner up and begin to use Bitcoin protocol to bring economic utility to the internet. And it's not till you see moments like this in your career journey, you say, this is the tipping point. This is the next moment of change. And, again, for this audience, let me put that in real basic language, which is we have just about 8 billion people on the planet now. And IPv4, which is what most of our computers and mobile phones use at the moment, has only actually got 4 billion address types. And yet we have 8 billion people and almost 90 billion connected devices. There are not enough IP addresses to allow the communication and the payment rails businesses to be safe and secure and run the way they should. So IPv6 is being implemented to solve giving every device and every person their own unique IP address. And that means that you can now also have a Bitcoin wallet address uniquely tied to every single IP address. And this is the tipping point of direct payment systems or machines being able to pay each other. And so it's taken a long time, Robert. So a complicated answer, but in one sense, there's no short answer on. We rely on standards, protocols to help us run things safely, securely, and at real extreme scale. And what we will see on the Bitcoin protocol and from BSV in the next short time, meaning the next 1 to 3 years, is, we have to be getting this network to 1 million transactions a second. We're 5,000 transactions a second now, and that surpasses all blockchains. But in order to deal with that super hyper connected metaverse, it needs to be very big blocks, a stable protocol, ultimately very high transaction throughputs, and resting on safe, secure standards that the world can rely on. And we're navigating our way through all those technology wars, but we are getting there. It's looking really exciting. And this catapults businesses like TAAL into processing billions, if not trillions, of transactions in the next few years. This is where the growth is.
I think that's a great point. And just to date myself, I remember IP, I think version 2 is probably early in my career. So
Yes.
That does absolutely date me. But the point being, I think here for investors is exactly you're articulating the fact that we now have the ability to implement this technology on a standards basis at an effective rate or at an effective cost level with the efficiency of transactions that you're achieving at 5,000, which is obviously improved. Thus, I think it's important for investors to realize that the infrastructure doesn't wait and people need to move. And the adaptability that TAAL presents as a platform for developers is also critical for a developer to make a decision, in my opinion. I think that's great. Richard, could you maybe just walk people through some of the quick balance sheet items, maybe just talk about the sale leaseback that was able to be achieved under your leadership? I think is very ingenious. And then maybe just talk to where the other thing I get questions regarding is the prepayments you've already made as a balance sheet item. I don't think people give you credit for the money that's already been, for the lack of a better word, spent / capitalized.
Allocated. Yeah. I know. I think you're right, and thank you for raising those, Robert. So yeah, maybe firstly, TAAL went and acquired in November 2021 a company in New Brunswick, Canada called Chief Fuels, and that acquisition was an all-share acquisition, and we acquired a company that ultimately owned a 60,000 square foot piece of land with a great building on it. And that building is our 50 megawatt mining facility in New Brunswick that we're ultimately developing. And yeah, as I took over as CEO in January 1st, I looked really at our CapEx plan over the next kind of 2 years in terms of what we need to do with that facility. And that led to effectively saying, could we find a strategic partner to develop that site with us? And we found and partnered with a property fund, and that property fund acquired that Chief Fuels company from us for cash, for $24 million. And so that put cash on TAAL's balance sheet this year without me needing to do an equity raise. And bearing in mind that we bought that asset for about 13 million in shares in November, this was a really great step for us as a company. And second to that, the property fund has agreed to invest $20 million of CapEx into that site to build out the heavy plant, so meaning the substation, distribution transformers for power to ultimately bring online that 50 megawatts of usable power by the end of this year. So again, that's 20 million of CapEx that TAAL didn't need to go to the market to raise, or that we didn't raise in debt. So that's a really significant transaction for us. And I think, Robert, right now, when we're seeing the dip in the market and the pressure that is on a lot of mining operators who've taken on a very large amount of debt to run operations, I am largely delighted that TAAL is pretty debt-free when it comes to this. And so this is a great move. And that partner is very long-term committed. And just to conclude that, we're a 10-year tenant for that site. So we've entered a long-term lease agreement to be the only tenant in that site.
No, I think that's great. And I think one of the best transactions I've seen a company execute on. So it's clearly phenomenal for you. With that, Richard, we'll end the recording here of presentation for investors. We thank you very much for attending today. And if you do want a one-on-one meeting and have not registered, please send me an email at Breza, B-R-E-Z-A, at lythampartners.com, or feel free to click on the one-on-one meeting request button and click on the button. With that, I want to thank you, Richard, and have a great conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. A pleasure. See you in the week ahead.